Hello and welcome to Endurance Minded. It's the podcast that aims to redefine what it means to reach our full potential by exploring how movement and mindset impacts our lives and how we can all work to show up as the best versions of ourselves. I'm your host, Taylor Thomas, founder at TEC, and before we get started, I've got an all call. If you're a coach or an entrepreneur in the health and fitness industry who's trying to grow your business without burning out, I want to personally invite you to apply for the Growth Circle. The Growth Circle is our business accelerator program at TEC, and it's designed specifically to serve providers like you in the health and fitness industry. People who are incredible at what they do, but they need a proven framework and real support to actually scale. Let's be real, running a coaching business can feel like a grind. You're juggling programming and client communication, marketing, admin work, and somehow you're still trying to grow your business. That's where the Growth Circle comes in. Inside the program, we help you nail down your ideal client and get really clear on what your offer is. We help you build a consistent lead gen process so you're not wondering where your next client comes from. We help you improve your sales skills without feeling salesy. And most importantly, create systems and support so that you're not doing it alone. You'll be a part of a driven community of other business owners in this space who get it. We host regular group calls, team intensives, mastermind sessions to make sure you're never stuck trying to figure it out in a silo. So if you're tired of winging it, if you're tired of trying to do it all by yourself, to recreate the wheel, figure out what levers to pull, what's broken and what's not, if you're ready to turn your passion into a business that actually works for you, I want to invite you to apply. You can find the link to the Growth Circle in our show notes. And I want you to really think about what's best for you and your business. I want you to think about how your business can really make an impact on the industry and how it can give you the life that you're excited about and make the money that you deserve, working with the clients that you love, spending time investing in the things that you care about and you're passionate about. So if this is a problem you're committed to solving and you want to take your business to the next level, again, click the link in the show notes. I can't wait to hear from you. Hello and welcome back. I'm excited to introduce another episode of Endurance Minded today. We're going to get into redefining some language that's really pervasive in lots of different areas. And what we're going to talk about is endurance. And we're going to think about the idea that the most important race that you'll ever run doesn't really have a finish line. That when we think about endurance, we think about it from a physiological adaptation perspective. We think about it from our ability to endure, specifically hardship. And what I want to set up today is a thesis that posits that endurance isn't just for sport, but it's really an operating system. It's a framework for how we build and execute on a meaningful life. And this is important for a number of reasons. One, it's really literally the core reason that I founded this podcast almost 7 years ago, right? When we think about being endurance minded, obviously I've spent the majority of my life in endurance sports, both on a personal note as well as in business. And so there's an obvious tie in there. But what I really mean by that is we need to be endurance minded. We need to think about things through the lens and with a framework of endurance. And when we do that, it really redefines what it means for us to be healthy. It redefines what the language of endurance means for us. It redefines our time horizons, how we think about and quantify success. And so I've never really fully unpacked that on this podcast. And it's actually been coming up a lot. I've been thinking about it a lot. I've been having conversations about this endurance mindset, how endurance is actually a skill and a framework by which we can think differently, we can execute differently, we can strategize differently. And I've been writing about it a lot in my weekly newsletter, The Business of Coaching. I haven't talked a lot about that newsletter on this podcast. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, but I have been putting out a free weekly newsletter for a while now, and this is a theme that's really been recurring in a lot of ways because it's something that, again, it's so impactful and it's so meaningful when we think about it differently, when we take on this new mindset. And so, as always, we'll get into it today. We'll talk about the mindset of this. We'll get into some specifics, and then the goal will be that you walk away with tactical guidance for how to actually execute and deploy this in your life. So let's start with redefining endurance and healthy. I want to purposefully and intentionally bring healthy into the mix, because I think when we start to go after a redefinition of endurance, it is nearly always synonymous with a relentless pursuit of our goals, of our full potential. And that's a very slippery slope. I am 100% on board. Anyone who wants to go about achieving what they want in this life, making an impact, reaching their goals with a relentless mindset. But just on the other side of that, we start to be unhealthy. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to redefine, again, what does endurance mean, and redefine healthy as well, because I don't think that we can talk about endurance as a framework if we don't talk about what we really should be, in my opinion, thinking about when we use the word healthy. And so let's start with just a few areas of where this comes up. First, we're inevitably going to butt up against the cultural definitions of these things, specifically health, right? The cultural definitions, in large part, are things related to metrics. So health is related to your biomarkers. It's related to all of our wearables. It's related to all of the data that so many of us are either producing or have access to. It's also going to be related to your physique. So how do you look, right? So body composition. Do you look quote unquote fit? Do you look quote unquote healthy? Now, there are certainly optimal ranges, and there's nothing wrong with having goals related to our physique or our body composition or how we look. But again, I just want to break apart this more kind of classic cultural definition of healthy. And then the last way that really shows up is performance, right? So if we're fast, if we can run long distances, if we can bike long distances, if we can climb and hike, and if we are really active, if our performance is quote unquote good or better than other people, then we are healthy. And while all those things have their place, there is an absolute opportunity for an expanded definition of health. Let's continue to break that down a little bit. So, first, I want to just challenge the idea, and I want to plant the seed that endurance is not just purely physical. Right? So we think about, again, endurance is the ability to endure. Right? There is a physical component to that, whether it is with exercise or something else. Right? I'm enduring this really challenging season in my work. I'm enduring this challenging season in my in a particular relationship. But there is again that assumed output of effort, and there's a physical component of that. And I want to just offer up that endurance is not purely physical as a framework to for you to hold on to as we move through the rest of this exercise and through the rest of this episode. What I really want you to think about, and what I would like to offer as a more expanded definition of endurance and health, is that it is a few different things. It's adaptability, it is consistency, it is emotional stamina. So let's talk about those in particular, or those specifically. Adaptability, right? How stuck are we that things have to happen a particular way? How tied to a particular end result are we? How much of our identity is wrapped up in a particular outcome? When those things are too strong, then we lose adaptability, which means we ultimately lose endurance. We lose the ability to stick with it, right? Stick with it mentally, stick with it physically, stick with it emotionally. And so I think adaptability plays a really big role in endurance, again, through the lens of this reframe, through the lens of this expanded definition of endurance. Consistency. We've talked about it a lot on this podcast. You hear about it everywhere. But what I really mean by that is not consistency at all costs, but consistency to the extent that it allows us to continue to endure, that we do recognize that it doesn't mean that we have to give 100% every day, but maybe we give 100% of what we have on that day so that we can continue to endure, because we recognize that it is a long game, right? We recognize that ultimately the goal is to do it for life. We recognize that there is an opportunity to stay in the game, so to speak, when we are consistent, and that's really the only way. But I think we can't talk about endurance without consistency. But again, I do want to state that it's not just consistency at all cost. And then emotional stamina. The biggest part of endurance here is that we might get physically tired, or we might have the endurance physically. We might not get physically tired, but emotionally we get worn down, right? Emotionally, we are tied too closely to the outcome. Emotionally, we are troubled by where we're at. We are riddled with self-doubt in the process. And so the emotional stamina is actually probably the biggest skill to cultivate as it relates to endurance. Because without that, that's going to erode our ability to show up physically. And so again, I want to reframe endurance, and ultimately, again, health is tied to this. That it is really three things. It is adaptability, it is consistency, and it is emotional stamina. And then I want to talk about, or I'd like to introduce a more expanded spectrum of health. So again, not just physical health, not just the classic conventional externally focused metrics, physique, performance, but health that actually allows us to show up and move in the direction of our goals, that allows us to continue to endure. And what that health looks like, or what healthy looks like through that lens, is that we're going to have physiological health, right? So again, that's the physical piece. And absolutely, by all means, that is a cornerstone. And I think that we should be physically or physiologically healthy. However, there's a few other pieces to that. I think that we should be emotionally healthy. So again, we should develop that emotional stamina. We should also develop emotional agility. I think that we should develop emotional vulnerability. So the ability to understand other people's points of view and pivot when needed, and make sure that our identity is not so too closely aligned to any one thing, but we have the ability to connect to other people and places and things and opportunities and experiences. And so much of the physicality of what we do is driven by the emotional aspect. Relational, right? So let's talk about relational health. Nothing happens in a vacuum, right? If you want to continue to endure, you need people in your corner that are aligned with your values, so that you can continue to stay to stay in it. So if we're not talking about your relational health, then we're not talking about endurance. And we're not talking about your performance or your physiological health, because without the relational health, it will erode everything else. And then business or career. So the health of how you engage in your work. I think that this is a very important and often overlooked piece. We spend the majority of our lives working. So many of you in our audience, in the endurance-minded listenership, are high performers. You're high drivers in your career, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're an executive, someone who is devoted to your career, who has big goals. We have to talk about what healthy looks like through the lens of your career, your business, your entrepreneurial endeavors, whatever that looks and sounds like for you. So I want to expand the spectrum of health. I want to talk about physiological health. I want to talk about emotional health. I want to talk about relational health. And then I want to talk about business and career. I want you to include all of that when you think about how we define health. And what it actually looks like to be healthy. Okay, so that's the framework, right? I want to offer up some different definitions. I want you to just hold those in your mind. I want you to think about what those can look and feel like for you, what areas of your life maybe where you feel healthy, you feel like you have appropriate endurance, and maybe areas that don't feel as aligned. And just hold that as we continue to move through the rest of this episode. So now let's talk about what it looks like deployed in our lives as a skill. How do we actually use endurance as a framework, as a skill set that truly impacts all these areas? Again, defined as a spectrum. What does it look like to see endurance as a life skill? So I want to use the more classic definition of endurance, which is the physiological, right? We think about endurance. We think about our ability to move our bodies for long periods of time, to continue to produce effort when we are tired, when our bodies are run down, when we feel like we are in an energy deficit, but yet we continue to endure. That is, kind of our classic representation and example of endurance. So I'm going to use that actually to draw parallels into other areas of life. So let's start by thinking about training through plateaus. So if we think about endurance classically, again, through this more singular lens, without this expanded capacity that I've talked about, we're going to know that it is going to be hard at times, right? We're going to plateau. We're not going to have motivation. We're not going to have drive. We're not going to be seeing the results that we want. So we're going to have to continue to push through these time periods when they don't feel effortless, when they don't feel particularly easy. And it's not if, but when. We know these things are going to happen, but they're also going to happen in life. And so when we think about training through those plateaus and we think about what that means for endurance, I want you to also think about other areas and times in your life where you've had to train through the proverbial plateau. So when in your career or your work or your entrepreneurial journey did you feel like you were plateaued? You weren't making the progress that you wanted. Things felt hard. You didn't have the team, the support. You weren't making the money that you wanted. Whatever that is, when was that a plateau? When have there been plateaus in your relationships? When have things felt hard or friction filled, or like you weren't making the progress that you wanted? So in all areas of our life, this same thing can happen. We can use the example of a plateau from a physiological perspective because many of us understand what that can look and feel like, but we have to know that, again, endurance as a life skill is something that is directly applicable to so many experiences in our life. We have to continue to push through, right? So now if you've identified that time period, I want you to think about, what did it look like on the other side of that? If you pushed through, if you continued to endure, what happened on the other side? Right? What would you have lost if you would have given up, if you would have not endured. And that's the same thing, right? Endurance, again, as a framework, is a skill that we know when deployed correctly and appropriately provides outsized results for the input that we put in, right? Is it hard to stick with it? Absolutely. Does it hurt in the moment? For sure. Is what's on the other side of that so much better than what we had to experience? I believe so. That's been my lived experience, is every time something is really, really hard and it feels like I want to give up and it's hard to find the endurance. It's hard to continue to push through. It's hard to show up the next day, day after day, or you're in the race and you're pushing through hour after hour. Inevitably, that time period won't last forever. And what's on the other side of that is almost always sweeter than the pain, frustration, and friction required to push through. And so I just want you to recognize that and see that endurance, when we push through, when we get through these plateaus, is really something to be celebrated and a skill that I believe is worth cultivating. So now let's talk about endurance as it relates to rest and recovery. So if you're building endurance, if you're building your physiological systems and you're trying to build a body that is able to endure, that is able to go longer and harder and faster and further, inevitably, rest and recovery has to be a part of that equation. So you can't just go, 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 right? When we're training for a big race, what do we have to do? We have to have an appropriately structured training plan that integrates rest and recovery. We do hard efforts and then we rest and we recover. So what does this look like in our lives, right? This is really where I want to think differently about endurance and about what it looks and feels like to be healthy, because this is where things can get a little slippery, right? Endurance at all costs. So we might be willing and even able to push through, keep our nose to the grindstone, continue to drive. But when we do that in the absence of rest and recovery, the same thing happens that happens on the training front, is we get injured and we get burnt out. Right? So any other area in our life where we endure at the expense of our rest and recovery, we get injured and we get burnt out. Right? Now that can take on lots of different forms depending on the area of life that we're talking about, but ultimately the response is the same. Our bodies will put up with a lot, but they also have to have doses of rest and recovery. What this really looks like in your life is good boundaries and delegation. So delegation obviously is going to, we think about that as it relates to work, but it's also delegation as it relates to other relationships, right? How do you communicate effectively with those around you so that you have the support that you need, right? How do you communicate so that you can continue to stay in it, so that you can continue to endure, so that you can create the time and space necessary to rest and recover? And then how do you set clear boundaries around that? So with the lack of boundaries, with the lack of delegation and or communication specific to our needs for rest and recovery, our ability to endure is really going to be finite. We're really going to cap our potential because we can't just keep going. Again, the same thing is going to happen on the training side. We'll get more fit for a while, but eventually we'll fall off the cliff. And the same thing happens in all areas of our lives. If we don't prioritize rest and recovery, again, what that really looks like is clear boundaries and delegating and communicating how you set yourself up for success so that you can continue to remain consistent and come back day after day. Next is thinking about long-term training cycles. So again, we're using training as a lens, as a metaphor to think about what the parallels are between endurance as it's classically defined and the physiological adaptation to what it actually looks like as a framework and a skill set in our lives. And when we think about training, we think about long-term training cycles. If we want to build endurance, if we want to build the physiological adaptation, which is our ability to continue to push, it takes a long time. And I'm not talking about a couple months. I'm talking about years. We have to continue to do the same things over and over, very, very slowly. Our body adapts, it builds resiliency, it builds the fibers and the musculature and the aerobic capacity and the pulmonary, all the things, right? Every system in our body has to change. It has to adapt to meet the demands of the work that we want to do. It's the same thing in our lives, right? Every system, every structure has to adapt to meet the demands of our goals. And so when we think about what's required to do that, when we think about what it really takes for everything in our life to change, right? Because you can't accomplish new goals with the skill sets and the systems that you have right now. Where you're at right now has given you the ability to accomplish what you've accomplished right now. If you want to do new things, you have to learn new things. You have to be a different person. You have to have different people around you. You have to develop new skills, new systems, new processes, rewire your brain, rewire how you communicate, how you aggregate information and people towards a singular goal. So all of these things have to change. It's the same thing, right? It takes a long time, right? The needle moves slowly. And so, again, let's think about endurance. What does it look like to reframe how we think about endurance when we know that it's going to take a long time, right? If you want to do something incredible from a physical perspective, you're probably not going to get prepped for that in a handful of months, right? It's going to take multiple training cycles, season after season, to really, really prepare. Same thing in life, right? If you want to build something amazing, if you want to make an impact on the world, if you want to build an incredible business, have an incredible career, build incredible relationships with family and friends, it takes a long time, right? You have to rewire. Every system has to change to support that. And that is really true endurance. And something that I wrote I mentioned the business of coaching, my newsletter at the top of the show. And one of the things that I wrote a while back was that resilience in business doesn't come from brute force. Now, you might replace that with resilience in life. I'm talking specifically about business and entrepreneurship. But what we could say is that business resilience in life doesn't come from brute force. It comes from practiced endurance. And I want you to think about that. I was very intentional about that phrasing because endurance is something that has to be practiced. Even when we develop the skill, it's not a given that it sticks with us, right? If we're training for a marathon and after the marathon, we stop training, we don't keep that endurance. We don't keep that fitness. And it's the same thing in life. If we're training for something, if we're pushing through, we're trying to find new opportunities, new ways to think about things, build new relationships, build whatever it is, if we don't continue to practice that endurance, we don't keep that skill. So again, endurance is really a practical life skill. It's a framework through which we can think about how we accomplish things. And it's a framework for how we can redefine and reimagine what healthy actually looks and feels like. Because I want you to imagine trying to pursue endurance in the absence of these things that I've talked about, in the absence of that emotional stamina, in the absence of that relational health, in the absence of the emotional health, with just a nose to the grindstone, continue to push, no rest, no recovery, no community support, no relational support, whatever that is, or however you feel like you can connect to that. I want you to imagine what it would look like to pursue endurance without those things. And what that would ultimately equal is that you would be very unhealthy. Right? You would not feel good. You would be tired. You would be emotionally exhausted. You would be burnt out. You wouldn't have great ideas. You wouldn't be clear. You wouldn't be excited. So this is where endurance as a life skill really, really starts to take shape. So before we move to the tactical, practical piece of this, I want to take a second. Again, I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about, or I think it would be a disservice to you if we didn't talk about the myth of hyper productivity as it relates to endurance. I've touched on this, but I want to go a little deeper because I don't want what I'm talking about to get conflated with the more is better trap, right? Oh, so we just need to endure more. We need to continue to push at all costs. I said that earlier. That is not what I'm advocating, but I want to go a little deeper into the myth of hyperproductivity and how that ultimately creates burnout. So first and foremost, let's just talk about the more is better trap. And this relates to athleticism, business, any area of your life. If you try to pursue anything in the absence of rest, you will get injured and burn out. Right? I said that earlier. I want to say it very flatly and plainly. More is only better until it's not. Right? And more in the absence of rest only equals burnout and injury. There is no other equation. There's no other way to frame that where eventually we don't get injured and burned out. And again, injury can look like a lot of things. It can be physical injury. It can be emotional and mental injury. It can be relational injury. But let's just, more is not better. When we're talking about endurance, what I'm talking about and what I want to advocate for is a new framework to think about endurance as a sustainable and scalable solution for our lives, right? It is a broad spectrum of skills and tools that we deploy so that we are healthy, so that we are clear and confident, and we can continue to endure. We can continue to stay in it. And if we just take the more is better approach, if we just take the endurance at all costs approach, that is not going to yield the results that we want. And it's not going to equal the result that I'm talking about and what I'm advocating for. So I also want to put to bed the often false equivalencies of hustle and health, right? So there's this linkage that is easy to stumble upon out in the world, that when we hustle more, that is healthy. Now I want to be clear that, again, I think that there is a world where you can work extremely hard. You can be very focused. You can be very disciplined. I'm not advocating that you necessarily have to slow down. I'm advocating that you have to work smart in the right direction with appropriate doses of rest and recovery, and looking at things on this broad spectrum, right? Recognizing that it's not just a singular lens. And so hustle does not equal health. Now, are there seasons where we need to hustle? Absolutely. But that is different than hustle culture, right? That is different than this proverbial myth of hyper productivity. And so I just want to make that very clear. I think now what we're seeing, and it's great that so much of, well, not so much, but more and more of what is available out there from a content perspective is touting sustainability as a new marker of high performance. We are collectively recognizing little by little that the only true marker of success, and truthfully, the only people that are successful are the ones that are able to maintain, right? Are the ones that are able to stay in it longer than other people. And that is endurance, right? And that is making sure that we are satisfying the needs of all of these different areas of our lives, not just a singular focus. So I think there's a real shift happening here, but I do believe that when we are talking about high performance, when we're talking about success, when we're talking about goal setting, the only real way to define that is if it is done sustainably. So what I mean by that is, if you train for a marathon, and you are singularly focused on that endeavor, and you train hard, and you never miss workouts, and you push, and you do gain fitness, and you complete the work, you complete the marathon, and you meet your goal. But on the other side of that marathon, you're so tired and so fed up with training and so over it that you hang up your running shoes and you don't run anymore, then that's not a success in my mind. The only true marker of success is sustainability, right? That you were able to prepare for that you reached your goal, whatever it is, in whatever sector and area of your life that you are pushing, that you are working to develop endurance, whatever area that is. In my opinion, the only true marker of success is that if on the other side of you reaching that goal, you still have it in you to set another goal, right? You're still excited. You have a body that's capable. You have a mind that's capable. You have the emotional capacity to continue to pursue. That, I think, is the true marker of high performance. And true endurance, just to close out this section on going deeper, true endurance includes rest. It is not weakness, it is strength, right? The easiest thing you can do is to do more, right? It is not strength to push yourself too far, too deep and not rest. The strongest thing that you can do and the hardest thing to do is to build endurance, is to build strength while also including rest, right? Anybody can bury themselves. Anybody can go hard all the time. Anybody can continue to push themselves in the absence of clarity, in the absence of moving in the direction which is in alignment with their values. It takes true strength to continue to do that, but with the inclusion of rest. So again, true endurance includes rest. It is not a weakness. It is a true strength. All right. So let's talk about how we actually do this. I want to give you a framework. I want to talk about a system that you can use to build endurance beyond sport, right? So we've been using, of course, sport as kind of our primary comparison. That's where we usually think about endurance. That's where we usually think about health, right? We think about health, what it means to be healthy. We think about our physical selves. Now I'm going to give you a 4-part framework that's going to help you think about what this actually looks like outside of sports. So the first part of this is clarity. Okay. So before you start to build endurance, before you set the goal of enduring, before you recognize that it is going to take a tremendous amount of effort and a long period of time to reach your goals in any area of life, what I want you to do is I want you to get clear. I want you to define what you are enduring for. Now, the way that I would define this clarity, or the tools that I would encourage you to build to gain the clarity that I'm talking about, are your mission, your vision, and your values, right? Your personal vision, your personal mission, and your personal values. If you are pushing towards a business goal, then I would also encourage you to make sure you have those same things for your business, and that your personal mission, vision, and values are linked to and in alignment with the business mission, vision, and values. That's going to give you the level of clarity that you need to define what you are enduring for. Why am I doing it? Why do I care to work this hard? Why is it important to me? It's going to be really hard. It's going to be painful. I'm going to have to show up when I don't want to. It's going to last longer than I thought. It's going to cost more than I thought. Why am I doing it in the first place? You need to get clear on what it is you're enduring for. Second part of the framework, the cadence, right? So create consistent rhythms, not just surges. So again, I talked about endurance It's the long haul, right? It also includes rest. So just like the example I gave about the marathon, not picking on marathon runners, a surge would be to train for 6 months, do the marathon, and then give up, right? Be done with running, be done with exercise, or be so beat up that you can't go back and you need to take, 6 months or a year off. I want you to clearly define your cadence. What are the consistent rhythms that you can get into that allow you to build consistency and sustainability versus surges in effort? Now, I recognize that sometimes more work has to be put in. We even talk about this in the workplace, right? We do sprints. A lot of companies use that verbiage. We're gonna do these short sprints. That's not what I'm talking about, right? For sure, apply more effort when needed. Work more some days, some weeks, some months. That's totally fine. That might be part of your cadence. Understand what your rhythms need to be. Set those expectations clearly. Define what that cadence is so that you know what success looks like, so you can define that clearly. All right. Now we have recovery. So, third part of the framework is recovery. Build proactively, build in rest so that you can have longevity, right? So, what does this look like? Right? You got to get clear. Again, that's why the cadence is important, because you can look at this and understand, okay, what's appropriate, what's required of me, and then where can I rest, right? Be proactive, don't be reactive. This is where it goes sideways for so many people. We wait till it's too late, till we're in the thick of it. We can't see the forest for the trees, and then it's hard to identify when we need to rest. There's also a litany of other things that go along with that. We have anxiety, we have self-doubt, we have self-criticism. When we're in the thick of it, resting feels like the antithesis to what we actually need. So we continue to push, drive, get ahead of it. Put it on your calendar. When are you going to rest, right? Doesn't have to be every, doesn't have to be a nap during the middle of the day, but just get clear. Be proactive about when your rest is going to take place so that you're in it from a longevity perspective. Lastly, community. Surround yourself with people that mirror the long game values. Let me say that again. Surround yourself with people that mirror long game values. If you're around people that are doing all of the opposite things that I've talked about today, right? They're burying themselves, right? They're thinking about health through a singular lens. They're thinking about endurance as a sprint. They're not thinking about sustainable systems. They're not clear on what they're enduring for. If you're around people that are doing those things, you need to align yourself with long game values, right? You need to align yourself with people that have long game values. The community is the key piece here, right? You can't do this in a silo. It's too hard. Take it from me. You got to have people in your corner, right? You got to communicate clearly what that looks like. You got to communicate clearly the season that you're in, what's going to be required, right? Communicate the why you're enduring, right? Communicate those mission, vision, values. Communicate the cadence, right? When are you going to take breaks? What role does your community take or play in that recovery piece? But you got to have it, right? So if you don't surround yourself with those long game players, right, you need people that see endurance and see health through the right lens so that you can continue to stay in it. So real quick, repeat those, right? 4-part framework for what it actually looks like to build endurance in your life. Okay, number 1, clarity, right? Get clear on why you're doing it. Why does it matter in the first place? Again, mission, vision, and values is how I'd recommend you go about that. Next, what's your cadence, right? Consistent rhythms. We're not talking about surges. You're in it forever, right? The goal is to play the game. The goal is that you have the opportunity to continue to engage and to move in the direction of your full potential for as long as physically and mentally possible. That's the goal, right? So what's your cadence? Not for 6 months, not for 6 years, for the next 60, right? Whatever, however old you are, forecast it out. Okay, what's your recovery? How are you gonna factor in rest? And last, and I think most important, community, right? Surround yourself with people that mirror long game values. All right. So I hope right now you have a really clear understanding of what this can look like in your life. I hope you have a different understanding, an expanded view of endurance. I hope you have an expanded view of what it actually means to be healthy. I hope you've identified, as I've been talking, what areas of your life this is showing up in. Where are you healthy? Where are you not? Where are you doing endurance well? Where are you not? Now I hope you've been thinking about the 4-part framework that I gave you. I hope you've put to bed the fact that more is better. I hope you've recognized that the long game is what matters. And I hope you're thinking about this 4-part framework and you're saying, okay, great. This is what I can do. These are the steps I can take. This is where I can get clear. This is where I can define my cadence. This is where I can think about recovery. And these are the people I need around me to make all this happen. I hope that's where you're at right now. If not, I want you to press pause and I want you to write that down. Right? And I want you to really get serious about what it looks like to turn the tide and move the needle in these key areas of your life so that you can build endurance and use that as a framework. All right. So again, endurance is not about crossing a finish line. It's about how you move through your life. Right? It's a real skill because again, the goal is to stay in it. Hopefully, it's not over tomorrow. None of us are promised tomorrow, but I hope that we get to continue to endure. We get to continue to engage. It's a luxury, right? It's an opportunity. It's an incredible gift to be able to continue to endure. So let's build the skill. So I want you to think about where you're applying endurance. Where are you not? And then I want you to take it one step further. I want you to think about where are you mistaking output for progress? We get these things confused all the time. I'm doing a lot. Are you making progress? Specifically, are you making progress in the direction of the thing that you defined what you're enduring for? Let me be even more specific. Are you making progress in the direction of your vision and your mission? And is that progress in alignment with your values? That's the level of clarity that I would encourage you to get. So ask yourself, are you mistaking output for progress? Are you doing a lot? Do you just have a long to-do list? You're super busy, but you're not progressing in the right direction. Maybe because you lack the clarity, you lack the cadence, you lack the recovery time, and you lack the community required to move you in that direction. So I want to encourage you to do something with this information. If you're a person who journals, this is great. Write this down. If you're not a person who journals, take notes on your phone. Right? If you're listening to this in the car, if you're listening to it in an airplane, if you're listening to it somewhere, when you get to a place where you can jot some things down, do it wherever works for you. Then I want you to share it with somebody. Right? Share it with a training mate, share it with a friend, share it with a partner, a spouse, whomever. And then if you think that if you know someone who you feel like could use endurance as a framework in their life, an expanded view of what it means to be healthy, I want you to forward this episode to someone who needs to hear it. Because this is real. This is something that can really, really impact how we move through our lives and what we ultimately accomplish. So, as always, I hope this was helpful. I hope you're walking away right now with some meaningful, actionable things you can deploy in your life to help you feel more confident, help you feel more clear, help you feel like you're moving in the direction of your full potential and your goals. And until next time, I'll see you on Endurance Minded.